Huh?
Triumph in the trap.
This is for the dollar.
Do you believe in miracles?
Ay, I play chess, but only in 4D. I'm by myself, but they think I'm 4D. When they see me online, they think they know me. Go ahead, like and subscribe, you gotta show me. I applied pressure and they tried to reject it. Clearly ain't see I was a diamond, so they didn't accept it. Told me I was a failure, so I said F it. Might even start my own school and teach them a lesson. Yeah, I'ma call it South Harmon. Fly down south and get the South poppin'. One day I'ma give you a walkthrough and introduce you to this warp tool. I know you lost, that's just dynasty talk. Cause you can't start no franchise without no dynasty chart. I took a break from the game, they throw my dynasty stock. Till I came back like Wembanyama, I feel like Coach Pop. I can't say that I'm the GOAT, cause you ain't gonna agree. But if I own my own farm, I can make the GOAT. Me, the ladies love the beard and they used to love the goatee. That's when I was a lamb, burning music on CDs. I wasn't born in 88, December 87, that was 16 days away. Might fly to Dallas, why not? I just got paid today. When I land this dirt statue, I came to fade away. Check the timeline for the stories and the play-by-play. My life a Patreon link, you gotta pay to play. I work 16 hours, boy, that's an 8 and 8. X Factor like Dez Bryant, my boy 88. Why dream light when you living like a heavyweight? This ain't a 1 week thing, we grind like every day. They know my destination, Devi, like I hang with Ray. If they ain't know my name, I bet they know my name today. Treat this mic like a ATM, let's make a trade today. Drop this on Fizzle Friday, cause that's my favorite day. And I'm gonna do it my way, cause that's my favorite way. They tried to put me on the shelf like I'm layaway. Told me it ain't no way, so I made a way. Huh? Welcome to South Harmon, I'm glad you here today. Welcome to South Harmon, I'm glad you here today. Welcome to South Harmon, I'm glad you here today. Hit that Patreon link if you here to stay, huh? Treat this mic like an ATM, let's make a trade today.
What's good, everybody? 4D Chess Dynasty Football Podcast in the house. Hope everybody's doing fine. For those of you watching this, we're recording this on Wednesday night. The patrons, of course, you're watching it live if you're in here, or if you're not, then you're either seeing this on Friday or listening to it on the audio podcast. But I hope everybody's doing well. Adam, week 1, baby. You got to reach up and get that light.
Yes, sir. Got to get it, man. Got to get it. I'm excited, man. Week 1's in the books. Talk to me, man. How are you feeling about your teams, about your squads, and about week 1 as a whole? And anything that really stands out to you as far as like completely shocked, or is this kind of, we're used to seeing variance and craziness now?
Yeah, we're kind of used to it, and nothing really shocks me. Teams that you expect to win, you're like, man, how the hell did 3 of these studs just not do anything? And then you got teams that you don't expect to win, and all of a sudden you're going, how the hell did this team win a game?
Right.
I'm supposed to be tanking, bro. Like, what the fuck is this? So yeah, I don't put too much stock into it. Now we get to week 2, week 3. All right. Now we really start to take into account like how this fantasy season is going to be shaken out. But I think the wildest thing is always those week 1 waivers, right? I should say week 2 waivers heading into week 2. Jesus, man. Everybody dropping people left and right. There's dudes you're like, this dude's dead. I don't want it. Like I could talk up all how great I felt about Ronnie Bell on all my best ball rosters. And, after week 1, you're like, yeah, forget you. Hit the waivers, boy. You got to get somebody in here scoring points.
I have a feeling you'll find a nice home. It's just not going to be here anymore,
Yeah, it's not at South Harmon.
Yeah,
we didn't welcome Roddy Bell into South Harmon. I'm sorry.
I'm with you, man. So you got, especially in best ball, which we play a lot of, Dynasty Degenerates. We play a lot of best ball over here. All these spots are precious. I think for me, Mike, one of the things I'm kind of most intrigued by is not really week one, because I'm used to, like we just talked about, the variance as well as kind of overreaction. Like you know that's going to happen in spots. What I'm actually really interested in, and I'm not going to say this is going to be what we're talking about today, but this is something I've kind of been really forward looking to, seeing how the community does it, because right now you don't even really have WoRP data, right? You just have a week's worth of data, right? But what I'm looking forward to is week 3, week 4, when people start to tell themselves a story that this is enough of a sample size now for WoRP, and almost in right now you have all the WoRP data from 22 we've been going off of, right? And that's been the case for so long, and you see people that are really buying into this narrative of WoRP and how you can use it for roster construction. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think there's going to be a case, Mike, here in the next 3 weeks or so, where you see people wanting to do the right thing with WoRP, but the data is not quite big enough to where you can make some bad bets, I think. So that's one of the things I'm looking forward to early in the year.
I think there's some things, like I've been looking at it, just from a generic standpoint. I'm not getting too league specific yet, because like you said, I need a couple weeks. Right? I need a couple weeks of a nice average, and then I can start to make some conclusions or some plays that I want to make. But something that stuck out to me right away, man, and we kind of knew it just with the way what happened in week 1 for the tight end position. But for your lineup leagues, man, this whole F them tight end strategy paying off big time, right out of the gate. That WoRP line is so far below everything else, just for your standard like half point tight end premium in a lineup league. Like for those type of leagues, I mean, you got guys out here just absolutely killing it as far as AWoRP goes that shouldn't be, right? That absolutely shouldn't be up there. And you're going, yeah, exactly what Koopa was talking about when we did the AWoRP show was like, force yourself into starting the Hayden Hurst of the world, force yourself into starting the Hunter Henrys of the world, the Donald Parhams of the world, actually a positive AWoRP, like very, very, very positive AWoRP player. So force yourself into starting those dudes, and you're going to reap the benefits, the rewards. So I really like it. I would say that there's some interesting ones, like some interesting numbers. I know I was talking with you about it the other night, where we're looking at the highest WoRP players on the week for AWoRP, and of course Tyreek Hill, just absolute monster of a game. AWoRP wise, if you just look at generic, if you're on the WoRP tool, the Mind WoRP 12 by 10 25 PPR lineup league, Tyreek Hill won you 0.384 games, right? But by far and away, just leading the pack for the week as far as a WoRP advantage. But number 2, Adam, our boy Brandon Aiyuk coming in at 0.286. Let's go. And just think about that. I know these are numbers, and like we said, they're going to average out, but doubling up one Patrick Mahomes in a Superflex league. Think about that for a second. So other than that, though, tight ends, booty cheeks.
I was going to say, though, what's interesting about the Tyreek Hill point, and to the tight end point, it will be separate. I'm going to make a comment about Dynasty Generous. Think about this. Like Tyreek Hill, right, going into the year, said the goal is 2,000 yards. And right or wrong, a lot of people were kind of saying, oh, man, that's just way too bullish. You're being crazy here with this goal, right? After 1 week, Mike, he's on pace for 3,500 yards. And not just that, you talk about WoRP. Just to give you – those of you that don't, at home, you're driving wherever you are, you're not access to a calculator. Quick math isn't really very easy. Mike, the WoRP you gave for that week across a 17-week season is 6.5. So to give you an idea of how much that actually dropped a hammer, like if you had Tyreek Hill on your team, there's the rest of your team would have to be like either very, very unlucky, hit injuries, or pretty poorly built to not have a very good chance of winning this week. He went that bananas, right? Like he had a unbelievable week, and then Aiyuk, to your point, had a great one. Tight ends, I'm very interested to see when Kelce and Andrews are back what this looks like. But to your point, man, yeah, the tight end position after week 1, it's 1 week, so don't get too carried away. But I will say, like the point that we're making about AWoRP and showing you that tight ends in most formats don't matter, this is why. Like Hunter Henry's the tight end 1, and a lot of the tight ends that were in the top 10 don't carry any dynasty weight, right?
Nope. The good thing too, like TJ Hawkins is kind of a darling. He's a darling of mine, right? But he was a darling in the community where, people were like, this could be the tight end 2, this could be the tight end 1. People were thinking that. If you look at AWoRP, he comes in as the number 1 tight end, but it's 0.081 wins over a replacement player. But you got to remember, when we're looking at AWoRP, I'm even putting this on medium roster efficiency to try to expand the scope of how many people potentially could be started on the start data, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not doing super strict. I'm not doing that. But even if I do medium, which is like I'm making a lot of concessions as far as startable tight ends, Adam, number 1, 0.081. Like, for reference, that was about the same as, the shitty ass game Josh Allen gave you in Superflex. Right, think about how bad that game was and how pissed people are. How about wide receivers? Cortland Sutton, kind of a difference maker. Woo, well, baby, hold me up, hold me up in AWoRP. I'm doing backflips for Cortland Sutton, or Raheem Mostert at running back position, Adam. So not that great. And then the crazy thing is, he's the number 1 tight end as far as AWoRP concerned. But if you go to True WoRP, Hunter Henry, number 1, Hayden Hurst, number 2, TJ Hawkinson wouldn't come in till number 3, and there's actually a pretty significant drop-off in True WoRP. He's 0.045, almost cut in half. Hayden Hurst jumps up to 0.09, and Hunter Henry 0.1. So, yeah, we'll put 1 in the record books, 1 in the win column. We'll see how it goes next week with these big-name tight ends back. But as far as week 1 goes for the tight end position, the plan is working. The plan of F these tight ends in lineup leagues, sell them all. Sell them all. Force yourself to start the Crusties, the Hayden Hurst. I mean, geez, Adam, even in the True WoRP graph, like, it's almost disgusting to think that Blake Bell is a positive WoRP, tight end 7 in WoRP on the week, right, with 0.015. Now think about that if you're forced to it. What a win you got. What an absolute win you got. And Donald Parham, number 4 tight end in True WoRP. So, yeah, I'm gonna take a little bit of a victory lap. Well, I'm at least gonna stretch, because I feel like this tight end approach in AWoRP might be something for lineup leagues that I'm gonna implement fully. Right, I got probably 1-2 shots at guys that I really think are difference makers. After that, I don't want a single one of them. I'll trade them for whatever.
Yeah, I think the key is making sure you liquidate all the dynasty value. Try to put that value elsewhere.
Yep.
And then, I mean, the one thing about it, I do think that could be problematic when you're having this low of tight ends, and where, like, I think if you really are going to do this process, everybody listening, I think personally you have to almost get rid of all of them, even so that you're not – what you don't want to have to do is decide what week you're going to start any one of these guys versus any other guys, right? Like, almost just take it off to where you have 1 or 2 at the most. Like, you don't want decisions. You're just saying, I'm going to start this player week in and week out. You can go to the waiver wire in the playoffs if you need to, but the idea is basically you're taking out decisions and you're liquidating all the dynasty value, so you just keep starting that tight end. Not really caring as much as long as there's options of them to catch the ball, do things with. Opportunities there, put them in the lineup, get the dynasty value out of that position and elsewhere. So I think week 1 showed you why that could be huge. Mike, let me ask you this then. Specifically on the points of, like, Brandon Aiyuk going off, Zay Flowers, some of these receivers that people didn't really have pegged to have this type of a workload early. Obviously, there's other ones that we did that we're thinking have a great workload but did not get that. So on the receivers like Aiyuk, like Zay Flowers, any thoughts there? Lineup best ball, and then getting into the topic of the show today.
I think Aiyuk is probably one in lineup leagues that was a reasonable starter, even in, maybe start 10 formats, start 11 formats. Like, start 9, I think he was probably still a reasonable option too, but now we're getting a little bit more of that fine line for people in their roster construction. But I would say anything for most standard leagues in Dynasty, that was a dude you were definitely starting. So to see him explode in week 1, Scott Connor always talks about capturing WoRP. Well, you probably captured all the WoRP with him. Now, I would say in start 9, there might be 1 or 2 people out there that was like, Steelers defense, I'm listening to the bullshit Mike's been spitting a Brock Purdy and his shitty ass elbow. Maybe in a start 9, I got better options. Zay Flowers would be the interesting one, because I see in a lot of formats, even myself, start 10, start 11, Zay Flowers wasn't in my lineup. 1, because he's a rookie. 2, because it was like, do I really want to put this dude in there week 1 when I have no idea what he's going to do? So, As far as the AWoRP perspective for lineup, yeah, you probably missed on the Zay Flowers and capturing that one. But Brandon Aiyuk, I would say you probably definitely hit. And then, of course, the beauty of best ball is I'm going to capture it all. I'm going to capture it all. And the good and the bad. And this week was a bunch of good from those guys. So that really helped. The Tyreek Tua stack all over the place. If you've got that, like some of my, I had to check Adam too. I had to check some of my underdog best ball teams just week one, just for the kick in the balls to see how bad some of them were doing. But I was actually pleasantly surprised that a lot of them had Tyreek and Tua stacks. And I'm going, well, we started off very well. We did A-OK week one. So
yeah, I have a few of those stacks in best ball dynasty squads. I think I have it three times. Those are just like, man, I'm glad I did not move off of Tua. Well, there was a lot of stuff around Tua all offseason. He's kind of feels like, especially after week one, regained some of the dynasty value and hype, but a lot of the concussion scariness ever since, not finishing the year strong for him. Let me ask you this. Specifically after this week, going into week two, what's top of mind? What do you want to discuss here in strategies or things that are really sticking out to you and you want to try to apply other than just the tight end and the AWoRP thing?
Just one more thing I wanted before we transition to something else.
My bad.
Well, no, it just kind of while we're on the topic of WoRP and a little bit of a week one recap and some thoughts. Adam, I would say this, that shit IDP 101 league that we started, got to be one of my favorite leagues that I'm in this year, just from week one, because it was so wild. TJ Watt scoring 80 points in that league. Josh Allen, not the defensive end Josh Allen, not the quarterback. He's at like 70. You're seeing some of these safeties, at 50, 60 points, like some of these linebackers just racking up tackles all over the field. And it being a best ball, like people not having to make decisions, and these end of the bench guys that you were drafting a defensive just having monster weeks. Adam, my team in that league is devoid of offense. Okay, it's CeeDee Lamb and a bunch of shitters, and that's the cold hard truth. Like, I don't remember who entered my receiver position, but it's like Alan Lazard and like some of these guys that didn't even have good games. But I'm sitting there and I damn near scored 600 points with all the starters we had with the defense. And then I pull up the WoRP graph on it. And lo and behold, TJ Watt on my team, number one WoRP player in the entire league for the week. Right. So this IDP with his juice scoring, I thought it brought some excitement to the defensive side of the ball. And especially because they score so much, Adam, like sacks and interceptions are worth a ton. And sitting there watching the game on Sunday, it gave me something else to root for. And, once I realized, I kind of put it on the back burner after we did the draft, right? And kind of was just out of sight, out of mind. Once I realized and looked at the score and like the league chats popping off and I start looking at the players, now I'm invested on both sides of the ball. So when NFL Red Zone's out there showing plays, I don't just give a shit about the offensive side of the ball when somebody scores a touchdown. This made defense exciting because every time TJ Watt would put Brock Purdy on his ass, I'm like, 6 points, baby, let's go. 6 points. Plus I get the sack yards, the whole thing. So it's kind of like watching a long touchdown. Or, when I think I got Jesse Bates right from the Falcons, and every time he pick off a pass, I'm going, oh yeah, let's go. The Monday night game, right? Trying to play catch up. I needed like 40, 50 points. I don't remember what the fuck it was at one point, but Jordan Whitehead also on a team out there getting picks from Josh Allen. And every time he does, I'm like, that's almost as good as, CeeDee Lamb just took a 50-yard touchdown. Let's go. So I thought it was very interesting. And then to see the WoRP data on it, and see how that league's set up. I'd be very interested to see just a generic IDP, with what they call 1, 2, 3 scoring and how that looks compared on the WoRP and really see how much defense matters. But this one with juice scoring, I can definitely tell you matters. And if you're a team that passed on defense in the draft, RIP to you, because these guys really do produce points and they'll hit some massive spike weeks. Now, I'm not saying my strategy of zero offense is going to work either, but we're going to find out. At least I was competitive week one with Baker fucking Mayfield. So yeah. I thought that WoRP observation was very good when I was going through it. Like, oh shit, these dudes actually do matter.
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting for me to see because I think you have those in that format, right? So this is a juice scoring to the defensive positions if they make huge plays, right? So You think defensive ends coming around, making sacks, fumble recoveries, fumbles forced, touchdowns, those type of things. I think in best ball, this format, you're going to be looking at some of those guys. I mean, if you have a combination of two high-end defensive scorers to the point like they're competing on a per game basis, not necessarily per game, but every week they have a chance to score as much as a Patrick Mahomes, right? So just think what that can mean to your lineup. I'll be very interested to see though how that does for you when it's more you have the full season, because I think you're going to have some weeks where you are probably beating everybody out there in points, literally the whole field. Yep. But then you're going to have some weeks where it's like it's going to be feast or famine. Let's call it that. I think is how much feast and how much famine. I'm kind of interested because week 1, man, it panned out for you. I mean, you had some huge scores on the defensive side of the ball. It was crazy to watch.
Yeah, I think it's something too. They were kind of talking in the league chat. I definitely want to do a few more of these leagues because I'm telling you, it's not just the league is fun to be in, but the fact that Sunday watching football, like you have something else to root for, and you have something else to root for in a big way. Like it kind of changes your
in the fantasy lens too, not just like your team or who you're betting on.
You're invested. Right, I'm watching NFL Red Zone. If the Eagles aren't making a defensive play, from a fantasy standpoint, I go, fuck. This dude just threw a pick, or this guy fumbled the ball. Damn it! Go to the next game. I don't want to watch this shit no more. Go on to the next one. So, and kind of the same thing too, because like there's return yards in this league. There's big points for special teams plays and tackles. So like all that stuff really matters. So it'd kind of be interested if we actually did get the what they used to make fun of, NFL punt zone. Let's get that. We need that channel. I might need to watch these special teams plays.
I love it, man. All right, so I'm with you. I think it's a super fun league. My team, I'm very worried about in that, and I'm very interested to see how the rebuilds go because valuing the both of them will be interesting. But I love the league too. It's gonna be fun.
I got a couple questions in for week 1 going forward too. AMAs, when we do it, we don't have a whole lot of time because we're asking a bunch of we're getting asked a bunch of questions, and we got to get the people what they want. But on this Dynasty podcast, right, we get to put yourself on mute.
Give me a mini spotlight series here. Give me a couple questions. I like this.
Let's go. Your outlook for Zach Wilson for the rest of the season. I know people are out there talking about Tom Brady or Joe Flacco or their trade for Trey Lance, and all that shit's a fucking pipe dream. It's done. Like Zach Wilson's the dude for the rest of the season as long as he doesn't absolutely completely shit the bed, which isn't unheard of. But for now, Zach Wilson's that guy. So what's your outlook for him? Lineup leagues, I imagine you probably don't have too much interest, but in these best ball leagues, do you have interest in maybe getting some Zach Wilson on your team?
I would say mildly, yeah. I mean, I'm not going to say no. I mean, any quarterback in best ball, right, with roster construction on most of the best ball teams I'm in, we're talking 4 or 5 is almost universally. Unless it's one of these scoring formats where wide receivers, running backs, the skill players catch up to them so much more, and you're looking at WoRP and you're like, man, outside of the top 12, like they're all kind of replaceable. So outside of that, of course, I mean, you want 4 or 5 quarterbacks. There are plenty that I have 4 or 5, but Mike, some of these ones we just drafted or have been around for 1 year, I don't have 4 or 5 legit quarterbacks. Of course I want some Zach Wilson. I do think, though, the point of him being for sure locked in as the starter for the year, like I think he has the opportunity to do that. Like as of right now, if he goes in and plays well, you get rid of some of the childish behavior. He owns up to when he's playing bad. Even when he plays bad, if he can just approach it more like a true professional and have some up and down weeks, I think he could very well be the starter. I think, though, it's not a sure thing that he's locked in because, I mean, you see the face of Salah, and 2 things are there for me. Obviously, one, you just got Aaron Rodgers there. You're super excited. You didn't even get to see any of it happen. That's part of it. But the other thing is there was a lot of, what do you want to call it here? Trying to be nice. He really kind of was despised Zach Wilson a lot last year. So I think if he's matured, I think there's a chance he can earn the job. But I do think realistically, if he doesn't, if he has some of these bad weeks, there's no guarantee he keeps the job. But if you have Zach Wilson shares, whether you just got them, whether you were holding on to them, like honestly, it was probably a poor idea holding on to Zach Wilson too long in best ball, not knowing Aaron Rodgers' injury is going to come. But not whether you did or not. Now, if you have him, I mean, this is in best ball especially. This is the best case scenario for your Zach Wilson shares. Like, so he's on the field, he has a chance to play on a very good offense and a good defensive team.
So the weird thing about it too is people talk about Zach Wilson too, and I saw all the things about like, could they do this? Could they do this? Could they do this? A lot of those, like, you can just flat out go no, like they can't, right? Like I saw the Matt Stafford thing. Like, could they possibly trade for Matt Stafford? With what fucking money?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, if the Rams decide to eat most of it, but yeah, it's not likely.
You just took on a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, and I know you restructured the deal, but you still paying him a shit ton of money, and a lot of that was up front, right? Your cap hit for him is pretty big. So it's like, where are you going to go that's going to be – we just got done talking about WoRP. Where are you going to go that's going to be a positional advantage or a WoRP advantage over Zach Wilson that you can actually afford? You know what I mean? Like, where is that actually going to come from, you know, to go win you ball games? So that's why I say, like, he's almost locked in because they don't have a lot of options, man. You pretty much just got to put it in there. Otherwise, you're bringing in other shitters on the same talent level to try to compete and hope they pick up the offense fast enough, they gel in the locker room, and they actually provide you value over what Zach Wilson would do.
Sure. I mean, well, I think one thing to keep in mind is that look at the New Orleans Saints. Look at, like, the cap is a myth in a way. If these guys decide, hey, now we're going to go now, Matthew Stafford, to your point, like if you're talking about acquiring a quarterback that has a significant contract, that's a little different because that's moving a lot of pieces. But if they decide, hey, there's a quarterback out there that's, by the time the trade goes through, we're going to have to put $10 million on the books, they're going to restructure 3 players deals and make that thing happen, man. Like that won't get in the way of something like that. To your point, though, if it's Stafford and they have to take on a heavy amount of the money, they are not up. They're up against the cap a little bit, so like they can finesse that if they wanted to. To your point, though, they have to really do an assessment and internal discussion of right now, like, what do we do? Do we have this kid? We drafted him. At this point, like, he actually, you know, didn't look great, but he didn't do terrible. I'll say that in the last Monday night game. Do we want to see what we have here? And what if we don't? Like, what are we going to do at the quarterback position? The solution isn't clear and obvious. So I think for right now, the opportunity in front of Zach Wilson's great because there was a scenario where if Aaron Rodgers plays all year very well, like he's sitting out, you know, on the sideline, and this is, I think, the best case scenario for Wilson. If you have him in best ball, Mike, like, I don't know what better you could hope for right now. Like, this is the best case scenario for Zach Wilson, and if you held on to hope with him, this is everything you wanted.
Guilty as charged. Guilty as charged. But not because I thought Aaron Rodgers is tearing his Achilles or was getting hurt this year.
You just didn't want to cut bait, right?
Listen, my thing was with that draft capital. You know, you're the number 2 overall pick. I don't care what they do right now with Aaron Rodgers and they're trying to win. Like, Zach Wilson was getting a shot to start somewhere, some other time. Like, it was guaranteed. It was happening. Like, he wasn't Jamarcus Russell. He wasn't somebody with a bunch of legal trouble who was going to be out of the league. And I know people throw out the fucking Josh Rosen thing all the time, but completely different fucking circumstance when you change entire regimes. This isn't their dude. They didn't fucking draft him. They got no ties to him. He's the 10th pick, not the 2nd overall pick. Gets shipped to Miami, and he did get an opportunity to play in Miami. Let's not forget. He just wasn't very fucking good.
Sure.
But, like, Zach Wilson was getting another shot. It's just a matter of whether or not he capitalized on it. So I'm happy Zach Wilson gets a shot. It just sucks that it came at the expense of Aaron Rodgers. Adam, so next point, because it's Zach Wilson. Let me ask you this: you were the biggest pusher on this show of Garrett Wilson, like biggest pusher of Garrett Wilson. What's his outlook now?
Of the two of us, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
On the show, I like that. You know, I like to make clarity. Like, there's two of us. Didn't go against the entire streets. What's it look like now for him? His outlook for the season?
Yeah.
I mean, if you got Garrett Wilson, you certainly hope that there's real talks that they're acquiring some other quarterback, because I think he goes from somebody with Rodgers. We're projecting and wish casting, right? But I think there was a top 12 potential. I'm not going to go top 3, top 5, but I think there was a top 12 finish potentially in the cards. You saw even with Wilson him make. I mean, everyone was going crazy about that catch in the end zone, which was awesome, by the way. But you look at the frame of the game and the body of work he had, the opportunity, and you should be a little bit shitting your pants probably with what you've acquired Garrett Wilson for recently if you did that.
Yep.
I'd say that right now, if Zach Wilson's the quarterback for the rest of the season, you're looking at a wide receiver too. Frankly, like that's. I don't think. I personally don't see tremendous upside with Zach Wilson. So it's definitely arrow down. I mean, that's my for the season. I don't think I'm taking him. I'm not going to give him drastic dip in value as far as long-term dynasty, but even in that, when you think about what the long-term in dynasty is baking in, it's this season. And I think for this season, it's not what we are hoping for at all.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time he's pushing for, wide receiver 3, if not wide receiver 3.
He was in the conversation all last, couple months, and a lot of people had him at 3, right?
Yeah, I think the fine people over at Keep Trade Cuts website had him at 3 for a while. Adam, this was one of the things that I had hesitation about with Garrett Wilson, right? Just moving him up as high, like the hype where it was going.
Like Rodgers being hurt was part of it?
Not just that. Not just, I mean, that's a hard one to future cast, but we were pushing up a guy who we hadn't seen it from. Like, we've seen spurts and there were some things we like, but most of it was built on hype. It was built off of, hard knocks. It's built off of, a route in the preseason where he runs and he goes, oh, this is going to be Devontae Adams all over again. Adam, like, the biggest difference is, say for example, it's CeeDee Lamb at 3. We're talking about CeeDee Lamb as the dynasty wide receiver 3. What have I actually
do you know who Keep Trade Cut has today?
Amon-Ra, baby. Let's
just
go.
Just want to make sure.
Yeah. But like CeeDee Lamb at 3, Adam, like I've seen CeeDee Lamb with Cooper fucking Rush, like still put up massive amounts of fantasy points. We didn't really see that last year with Garrett Wilson. One, it was his rookie year, so I don't think anybody really expected it, but still, like CeeDee Lamb has something on wax. Like he has something on paper. You can go back and you can go, we've got really good fantasy seasons out of CeeDee Lamb, and we've got good fantasy production out of CeeDee Lamb with bad quarterbacks. We've never seen that really with Garrett Wilson, partly because it's 1 year, but most of it was just built up on hype and future casting and projections, not on actual production. And that was the biggest problem I had with the Garrett Wilson thing the whole time. Like, he's jumping Tyreek Hill, he's jumping Amon-Ra, he's jumping CeeDee Lamb, he's jumping, Stephon Diggs, for example. And I didn't understand why we were doing it. When we've seen basically the same out of Chris Olave, and people weren't ever elevating Chris Olave to that type of territory, which was confusing.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, I would say to the point, I think what we did not see from Garrett Wilson in year 1, which then makes his WoRP or points per game where it was, which is more like a wide receiver 25, right? It was incredibly inconsistent. But like to be fair, I mean, he had a horrible quarterback situation, and we saw 102 yards and 2 touchdowns from the kid. Like we had plenty of points, and I think one thing to remember is Garrett Wilson's season as a rookie, right? 1,103 yards, 4 touchdowns is 2 touchdowns shy of CeeDee Lamb's sophomore season and more yards. So, like, what CeeDee Lamb had put on wax for his first 2 seasons, Garrett Wilson had matched with terrible quarterback play, and CeeDee Lamb did have the opportunity to play with Dak Prescott, albeit not the whole time, but a lot of his starting point of his career. I think the thing with Garrett Wilson is you look at a guy that has 1,100 yards in his rookie season with that type of quarterback play, drawing 150 targets. Like, you can definitely project, and I don't think that's crazy in fantasy or in dynasty to say this guy has a lot of the traits, he earned the targets, he did have a very good rookie season to make a leap. Now, part of the problem with dynasty, and this is just overall, like forget Garrett Wilson for a second, when you're talking about an asset like that where we're putting that type of projection, this type of a prospect profile, and we say, okay, this is 23-year-old guy getting a new quarterback, you're already looking at a person and a player because we like the profile, we like the name, and in dynasty, everyone wants to chase the youth, where that's going to go to the stratosphere. So to get him to 3, I think that was where, like, this is where we talk about tearing down, because for him to hit 3, he's going to have to end up being Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson light. He's not going to have to be, CeeDee Lamb. He's going to have to be those guys, even a light version of them, maybe not quite as good. So that's where, putting him at 3 is tough because, honestly, he has to hit all cylinders to keep that. So that's where, to your point, I totally understand it's tough. The one thing that also to remember about him being 3 is 3 is kind of this unclaimed thing that sounds sexier than it is. Right? There is a very, very big gap between 1 and 2 and whoever you put at 3 because the profiles aren't as great, and what they've done this early in their careers, like Justin Jefferson and Chase have, those guys are on. I just want people to understand this. Dynasty Degenerates, think about this. These guys are on pace, and what they've done this early in their career, especially Jefferson, is destroy the entire NFL's history. Like Jerry Rice type stuff is in the range of outcomes if he plays this well. Just understand this is how ridiculous those 2 guys are and why 3 sounds so much different, I think, than what it actually means. It's trying to find this person to claim whatever that, bronze medal is.
I saw a post about Justin Jefferson too that was just kind of in jest, but I thought it was hilarious. It was Justin Jefferson needs 85 more yards to be the all-time leading wide receiver in Bears history. Right? Just throwing jabs at the Bears. This was the best you could do. Jefferson's only been in the league 4 years. He's about to kill y'all.
Fizzle put on here too that CD had Amari Cooper taking a lot of the work early in his career. Wilson's the clear one from day one. Yeah, and none of that was a knock on CeeDee Lamb, and he had a fabulous start. My point is just that Garrett Wilson's rookie season, while it didn't matter per se in fantasy, I think there's a lot of sticky stuff there that I can understand why people project that high, but to your point, man, it's the problem when you put him that high or you acquire him there, you draft him in a startup, you trade for him at those type of values, there's no room for error. And there's no room for this, right? This is scary season for Garrett Wilson. I think he's still going to stay very high in dynasty value even if he doesn't have a, bona fide top 10 wide receiver season because there's going to be baked in excuses. But this is the problem for him all along was the quarterback play. We thought we found it, and it turns out it never really came, right? To your point about Chris Olave now, Derek Carr is not a world beater quarterback, I'll say, but he's above average, and I think sometimes people don't quite give him enough credit there.
Correct.
And that was always why it was amazing watching that game for me. I thought Shaheed was a little bit of a value in best ball because look what happens. Derek Carr's trying to find this guy. Derek Carr's always had an affinity to throw the ball down the field. Right. So in him and Shaheed and Olave are profiting from it. I think you're looking at right now Olave and Garrett Wilson, Mike, they're neck and neck. And I think the case has always been that they're very close. I've just leaned Garrett Wilson from production, from quarterback play. And at this point, you're looking at a guy right now, Mike, that is up 3 spots on Keep Trade Cut with Chris Olave. And he's technically outside the tier, but I would not be shocked to see making those two in the same tier and even Chris Olave flipping above Garrett Wilson at some point this season, given the circumstances.
Yeah, let me preface it with the fact that I know it's the Titans defense, right? It's the Titans secondary specifically, which is
RIP.
Hot garbage. Right?
We don't like a lot of those in the shit IDP league,
No. You don't really want too many of those players. Even though my Iowa guy, Monty Hooker, made a hell of a play on that opening kickoff.
Sure did.
Ripping that ball right out of the dude's hands, which was incredible. But Olave tore him a new asshole, right? 10 targets, 8 catches, 112 yards, didn't score, which, if he puts a touchdown on there too, people really losing their shit this week for Chris Olave. But you're right. Rashid Shaheed heavily involved, and I'm kind of impressed. Not impressed with the jersey number. 22 is a horrible wide receiver number. Please don't ever do that again. Go back to, what was he last year? 88 or something? Do that.
Yeah, 80-something.
81. I don't care. Pick a number in the 80s. Pick a number in the teens.
I wanted to say 89. I'm going to pull it up while you keep talking about
I think it might have been 89.
Olave.
It feels like 89. Yeah. 22 is disgusting. But Michael Thomas, too. Welcome back, MT. Now, Adam.
89 was it?
Good guess. Good guess, buddy. I like it. You got that steel trap up there.
Yeah, you see a number and a weird one like that, You get weirder, go to 22.
Michael Thomas, though, welcome back to him, too. But
sure.
The general point is that offense kind of impressed me just with how they were moving the football, how Derek Carr looked, how comfortable he looked. maybe it was a good thing they got John Gruden. And remember, he came in as a consultant there in the offseason. So maybe it was good. Got a little bond. I always thought Gruden hated Carr too, right? Hard Knocks. Didn't it seem like he hated
it? Definitely felt like it. I mean, I don't know how you infer anything other than that, but
like Carr's doing everything possible to win him over, and Gruden's like, nah, get the fuck out of here.
Mm-hmm. You want
Adam,
this
I will
too
say
bad.
this. I will say this with the Garrett Wilson thing though, like kind of where we're at, and say this really happens for Chris Olave after this season. Maybe he doesn't go out and do like 1,400 yards, and he's not a wide receiver one. Let's just say he's like on the fringe. Maybe he's like 19, 20. Could happen, right? If one of these receivers like this with this kind of youth, then people will start propelling them back up, just like we did with Garrett Wilson. If they start approaching this wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3, is this almost an automatic sell for you? Where you're like, I need to get out of this just to de-risk myself. Like, is that the strategy that we should be in? I know we do it with running backs. We did it with Kenneth Walker last year, but we never really talked about doing it with wide receivers, where it's almost automatic, like where you need to, because like you said, if he's at 3, how much more upside you got, right? Like, I know there's a gap between the two, but really, how much more do you have to go? Like, how much are you actually missing out on, even if he does make that jump?
So let me say this, and this is actually, I think this question is a good one for a topic of, I think sometimes we have to understand, and as the game evolves, and what I mean by that is fantasy, as the average dynasty manager, we use the word they're smarter. They're more informed. There's a lot more places to consume content. There's a lot more proven data points, right? We're using a lot more numbers and things to say this is why you should be doing X. And because of that process, Mike, I think the old days of just going out there and making 8 trades in a startup, and then you look in 2 years in, you're like, holy hell, what did this person do? Not that it doesn't exist out there, but it's a lot fewer and far between, where you're just getting absolute smash deal after smash deal after smash deal, and the league doesn't know what's happening. The reason I bring that up is I think we have to start understanding in this idea of the average person smarter, what are things to kind of, in my opinion, sell the narrative of. Like, don't buy this narrative, right? Fade the noise. And I think, for example, like we talked about, Kenneth Walker was the theoretical running back 1 in Dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about, if Chris Olave hits wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3, Garrett Wilson, either one of them, right? Either one of these guys cements themselves there.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? Because I think realistically for me, and just knowing how I play in a lot of best ball, right? And the reason I would like to sell someone like that is, hey, at this point you're saying you get to the wide receiver 4, 3 range, like there's gonna be so many people that want to buy, right? And you're going to say, all right, yeah, you should be trading out of this player here, Chris Olave, let's say, is the example. Because you, in theory, should be able to go down and get a tier down, and you pick up Brandon Aiyuk, right? And you can get a plus that means enough where I'm like, yeah, I'm interested. So I get that. But now the reason I want to talk about this with the theoretical, like running back 1 or wide receiver 3 or 4, like you look at Keep Trade Cut, and I think Keep Trade Cut is a dangerous place depending on what information you're consuming. Let me just say that, right. Dynasty Degenerates, before I put this out there, exactly what the specifics of the information you're consuming here can be dangerous. For example,
before we get accused of being amateurs for not consulting trade calculators.
Well, I was just going to say one of the things I think you got to be extremely careful of is their trade calculator has this value, what do they call that? There's a value adjustment. Value adjustment, and it's so
value bullshit.
It's so arbitrary, but it's also baked in. It basically speaks to me what that's doing is if you have a player like Olave, right, and you're trying to trade down, it's going to bake in a bunch of extra value to that side because he's such a better asset, and that really speaks to the lineup lens of trading. So, like when you make a best ball trade, that's something you shouldn't really be doing. My point here is. Getting to this, when you look at the Keep Trade Cut values, okay, so they do player values, and it's based on an algorithm of when people are putting in, their Keep Trade Cut, literally is what they're doing, right? And they take all these data points. If you look at what, right now, 7,400 is what the value currently is for an Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, and Garrett Wilson. They're all within 100 points of each other, right? Then you look at the next tier, it's 68 to 6,700. The next tier, 6,300. Just understand that's the top 10 receivers right there, right?
Yep.
Now, if you look at what Justin Jefferson is, it's basically 10K. Okay, so 10K versus a 7, right? Like it's those. They're saying those receivers are roughly 7. Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson. They're saying it's roughly 70% of what Justin Jefferson is, and I think, Mike, as crazy as you may think that is, I think a lot of times that's actually the truth, and it might not even be speaking to the full nature of how different people view Jefferson. So when someone gets this wide receiver 3, yes, I would like to sell. And to the point, we know why. Like, I want to tear down. I want to go collect value and get off of him because this is probably reaching a peak. But the problem is, one, I don't know what I can actually get just because he becomes 3, right? Like, does that actually mean because this happens that I can get a tear down of a player in a first or 2 first or whatever? Can I actually make that happen in my leagues? A lot of times I found, like with Kenneth Walker, again, that was theoretical. Nobody was paying anything for Kenneth Walker last year in the leagues I was in. I'm not going to say they never made a trade, but I mean, I played in, 18, 20 leagues last year, and I had, Mike, you and I both had a ton of Kenneth Walker, and my trading of him didn't really happen because this theoretical running back 1 price isn't that much. So my point here is that, yes, if you get a player that is getting to a peak point in value, I would like to move them. But 1, is it actionable in your leagues? And 2, I think the difference is, even if we say someone's a clear 3 at wide receiver, I think that argument, like, that's been a hot topic. Who's the next one? Who's coming up? I don't think it really matters currently because I think the market is going to tell you that 3 and 10 don't have much of a price difference when you go to a trade. So that's where, in theory, yes, I want to pivot off of Olave at a peak, but I don't know right now, the way the game's played, that means shit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think you hit on something with the theoretical value. Like, you could be Garrett Wilson and be what? Garrett Wilson's an interesting one, though, because I did see him go. I mean, we did so many trades, too, and we talked about this. I saw him going for damn near Jamar Chase prices some places, right? He's being thrown around like that kind of asset. So a little bit different. The fact that Amon-Ra's there right now, I can tell you, like, now this wide receiver 3, a lot different than wide receiver 1 or 2, right? There's a big difference. Not that Amon-Ra's a bad player, but you're not going to see damn near close to what Garrett Wilson was going for in the offseason.
And I'll tell you this much. Amon-Ra, right, is a guy we've been pounding the table for, and he's currently at 3 by Keep Trade Cut. And it feels like it's taken basically years of him proving people wrong because of draft capital, other weapons in the offense, all these things. But, Mike, here's the thing with him. Even now, I know when I see this on Keep Trade Cut, like, I know in my heart of hearts, Amon-Ra St. Brown ain't demanding this 2 first and a second type trade. Like, no. It's theoretical. So the difference with a Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, though, is because they're young, because people really like the profiles of both. Olave maybe a little shakier, but still a good one. But relative to Amon-Ra's, athletic profile, those are types that maybe, you can get to they have a discussion to be closer to a chase value. But I just wanted to make that point because I think there's a lot of things I've been thinking of lately. And we get these hot topics, he's a running back 1 in Dynasty, the wide receiver 3. They're fun discussions, but I think sometimes in actionable advice, you got to think about what does that really matter,
I think for me, for actionable, though, like, I know, Adam, like, if you want to talk about 2 first and a second, right, for Garrett Wilson, if that was the quote-unquote wide receiver 3 prices.
Yeah, just throwing out a number, right?
Can I get anything close to 2 first in value? Can I get you talked about it, there's not a lot of difference between wide receiver 3, right, value-wise, and I'm sure as fuck telling you production-wise, there's not a lot of difference. There's not a lot of difference between wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 18, Adam. Like, there's just not. Can I get anybody in there and another first thrown on? Like, is that good enough for me to get off of wide receiver 3 prices? And I'm telling you, if somebody approaches that and they have I'm not saying Garrett Wilson's profile is bad, but I threw out some of we didn't really see it from a points per game, consistency-wise. Like, you look at the total stats at the end of the year and you go, okay, That's fine. And then we compare it to other people, but then we also remember we got an extra fucking game we're playing now, right?
Sure.
So you inflate it just a little bit more.
Sure.
I look at it and I just like the floor wasn't ever there. Like it wasn't ever there. It was a lot of projection, which I'm okay with because we project certain players, but it's usually at certain positions. I always have a hard time projecting things like quarterbacks and projecting things like wide receivers, right? Because the elite quarterbacks are hard to get into that tier. And when you do, like you're gold, you're solid gold. Wide receivers, on the other hand, they're harder to project because there's so many fucking good ones, Adam. Like Brandon Aiyuk, we're just doing victory laps about how good he was. People didn't fucking like Brandon Aiyuk a lot going into the season. Like they haven't liked Brandon Aiyuk for a while. And even now, like keep trade cut, like he's finally moving up. He's moved up.
Let's not go finally. Like he's at 15. This is very fair for him.
Well, he's been moved up 20 spots in the last 30 days on keep trade cut.
That's my point, right? And that's because he come off a huge week, right?
Right. Like he's on the rise because of that. But he was kind of being disrespected. But production-wise, Adam, there's just so many good wide receivers that have some youth going for them. They have a good offensive situation. But it's so hard to rank them. If I find the one that I don't really feel solid about, like I'm like, okay, maybe we got some risk here. Like everybody's got risk because of injury. It's fucking football. But if you've got some risk because you've never really done it, you've never really had that floor, like I may not get wide receiver 3 prices, but I got wide receiver quote unquote 5 prices for Garrett Wilson, wide receiver 8 prices for Garrett Wilson. Gone. Well, and especially if you can just pivot to another one and get a draft pick on top. Like that's a no-brainer.
Okay, because I would say that would be probably part of the point I'm making here. It's a two-sided coin, right? There's one side which says wide receiver 3 looks like this, but it doesn't actually. You have this wide receiver 3 coin, right? You have this chip in theory. When you go to take it to the store, that ain't buying you what you think it is. That's my point about the currency difference, 1. And then 2, I think, because the average player is smarter, Mike, what I see a lot of times, even when they're peaking, and a lot of the leagues I'm playing in best ball especially, the first thing, like forget the player. It's nickel and diming your
maybe we do
top.
Away with the first thing. Maybe as a dynasty community to still find that edge, the right process play is give me 2 seconds.
Well, so you're saying Brandon Aiyuk in 2 seconds? Okay, but there again, Mike, and I don't even disagree with that, but that's now going 3 assets for 1, which 2 are liquid, right? So my point to you is not that I'm not selling, because I tried to make sure very clearly that I would like to sell at a peak. My point is that to get the strategic edge, which is more assets coming your way when they're the correct types, right? That's ultimately you can almost forego outside of elite quarterbacks. There's very few people, right? You can forego whatever name you think. We've talked about this at length before. I want multiple pieces, but there's a lot of times where the multiple pieces comes in forms of, junk. Like, it's not very good, and people will maybe send you a second. So now it's like Brandon Aiyuk in a single second, or Chris Olave is that wide receiver 3 price. And to me, like, that's not – I'm not even saying you couldn't decide to take that deal if you really wanted to go the route of just getting value. But I think that's where, for me, what I'm talking about here is yes, if you can tear down to a single first in best ball where we're starting 12 people in this 30 roster spots – you could probably convince me to go lower than even Brandon Aiyuk, Mike. The process makes sense. We know that, but a lot of other people know that too. So for me, it's not. It's finding the right deal, and does that match wide receiver 3 prices? That's my point. Is connecting those two things. Not that 2 seconds isn't the right play or a single first isn't the right play. It's more so what does that really look like in our leagues, and what's the cutoff?
I get you. I think it's just a matter of risk for me. Like you said, we play so much best ball. Like even the 2 seconds might be a hard deal to get done because people always do look at that 1 for 3. But that's when you take into other accounts, trade strategies. You throw some juice pieces in there. Get something back that you like.
Well,
now it's a 3 for 2 or it's a 4 for 3, and it looks more palatable to them. But the main deal is centered around Garrett Aiyuk and multiple picks.
Well, let's use some week 1 players, and let's just give a couple different ideas and discussions, and let's see what we think of what it might look like. So right now, Mike, let's say you were going to go and try to flip your Garrett Wilson for Brandon Aiyuk and Jacoby Myers?
It'd be tough to do right now because
Agreed.
Garrett Wilson's on the way down, Brandon Ayuk's on the way up. Now,
and Jacoby Myers also is probably getting a lot more love than people thought.
Now, last week, could you do that deal?
Sure.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if you couldn't.
Right. That's a much more palatable one.
I want to do this in a process of discussing, I think, ways of trading now, too. I think this is a good way to tie this in because that's what you're going to see, right? All right. You know what I see? I've seen plenty of offers, people, sending me DMs and texts all over the place. What do you think here? And it's Drake London for those two. Man, get bent. Like, this is, that's obvious. And I think that's something to think about when you're trading is right now, Mike, there's 3 assets on Keep Trade Cut. One of the things I do like to pulse here is risers and fallers because maybe not the small amounts, right? You're talking like Chris Olave's up 3 spots. I'm talking about guys that took a huge leap in value. 3 receivers, Mike, are up 20-plus spots. Brandon Aiyuk, Calvin Ridley, Zay Flowers.
Yeah. You think that's because Cody called him young Antonio Brown?
I think so. Call God, but no, I think there's profile. There's reasons to like the profile. Aiyuk has been an up and down story, but at one point a while ago now, people were very in on him, and you can start to see the reasons why they might be still. Yeah. Ridley is someone that's the age was concerning, but we've all seen him ball, and he went and did that. Zay Flowers had a massive workload in his first game. So, but my point is now with this, right? This topic of discussion is if you're going to go out and you want to try to get the absolute top dollar in current, you know what's not going to happen a lot of times in best ball where everybody needs every player is you're going to get 2 guys that are surging in value. Like, that's why I started with that. Because sometimes you got to be a little more crafty if you're going to try to get a deal like that done than just going, hey, I want your 2 assets that probably were wide receiver 1 and 2 in your lineup, and here you can have, the guy that has Zach Wilson throwing the ball all year. Like, sometimes you can't just go about it that – I think in a tear-down sense, Mike, that's where a lot of times people struggle is they try to shoot too high and just straight up 2-for-1s or 3-for-1s with surging assets. So
right.
that was the first part I wanted to talk about, where I think if we give 2 other names, you could probably get that deal done right now.
In reality, you should be going for the declining or whatever the opposite of surging. I don't know what the fuck that word is. Desurging?
I like it. We're going to use that. Desurging.
I'm just making shit up here as we go, but you want the fallers. You want the fallers. You want the fallers like could you get DJ Moore and QJ?
There you go. I think could you make cases for, a Pickens? He might be up a little bit, but I'm trying to think of guys who would definitely be down. DJ Moore's probably down.
Drake London.
Jerry Jeudy's way down because he's, there's a lot of guys you could make here. Now, here's the problem. Christian Kirk. Can I tell you the problem with that, though? Maybe not for me, but I think the problem for everyone listening, this is going to turn into good discussion. So, Mike, I hope you're ready for, a little bit over an hour here. But the problem with all that is going to be, Christian Kirk, man, he's not – this is what happens. We use 1 week as like a biblical – it's the word. Like, that's what happens. We say Christian Kirk is written off. We say that Jerry Jeudy's hurt, never going to play ever again. Did you see Treylon Burks? The quarterbacks – Mike, that is part of the problem, though, is if you were going off of week 1's numbers and you look at who had great weeks and who had bad, you know what's going to happen more weeks than not is all these players are going to have mediocre or bad weeks. Yep. There's not that many weeks where you have 20 guys popping off at a single position.
No.
So I think sometimes you have to be willing to take players that don't have this gigantic value ascension surge. I mean, you want to talk about value ascension surge, Mike. I don't know if you've seen Keep Trade Cut if you keep scrolling, but on the first page, someone's up 120 spots.
Puka Nacua?
Now, if you want to talk about selling somebody, listen, you can tell me all day about selling Wilson, selling Olave.
Yeah.
You and I will not. We have kind of based our theories very similarly. We have a lot of similar processes. Tearing down from those receivers has always been the case. You know who you should be tearing off of right now is Puka Nacua. Unless again, Mike, the cost for him, like no one's actually paying I mean, I don't think anyone's paying wide receiver 36. If they are, I can promise you whatever that is, he is off my team.
Yep.
Because you know who's behind him? Christian Kirk, Hollywood Brown, Mike Evans, Deontay Johnson.
Yeah, I'll give you about 35 more wide receivers. I think
Elijah Moore, Nuke Hopkins. I mean, I don't have Tyler Lockett, Jacoby Myers, all after Puka in this. This is so. Anyway, I think the point is though, who are two assets you could have gotten for that other receiver, Chris Olave or Wilson?
Right now.
Yeah, like instead of going for Jacoby Myers and two guys surging, let's call it Jacoby Myers and Brandon Aiyuk, where it's a little more blatantly obvious. Like, I want to give some opposing thoughts, like who you could go for. You talked about DJ Moore, and I forget the second one.
I don't know, who the hell did I say? Quentin Johnson.
Quentin Johnson. There you go. Yep. Guys like Terry McLaurin, maybe, right?
Yep.
I think there's a lot of guys. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be format dependent. I mean, we talk about context all the time. Lineup start 9, much different. Like type of players that you want to actually roster.
Right now, I'm talking the best ball lens, but if we're going to switch gears, for sure.
Best ball lens would open it up so much. And you talked about fallen players. I also like to target people that get shit on all the time. We sit here and we argue about them all the time. Adam, I'll tell you right now, Garrett Wilson for Deebo Samuel, and give me another. At the time last week, Zay Flowers. Like, that would have been a home run slam dunk for you.
Well, yeah,
you get something in production, and you get the upside in the rookie. Now we know what Zay Flowers is, but I'll still do the same thing for QJ at this point. He's a faller that people are shitting on, so why not do him? But like, I don't always have to go for the sexiest wide receiver. Sometimes it's just about a production.
Sure.
And you get that extra piece, right? That extra one.
In best ball especially, yeah. In best ball, you can get away with kind of foregoing the dynasty approach and just taking constant multiple players of production. Like, you can definitely do that. As long as you're not doing it in a single or two trades, right? You do it as a whole process, that'll end up playing well for you.
Do you think?
But I do think it would be very hard for people to make that trade a week ago. Like, even yourself, like, you probably, not saying you wouldn't do it, but you'd be thinking, man, could I get more, right? And it's easy to, in hindsight 2020, to say you take that deal. Now, today, and I don't even, I don't like Deebo, but shoot, man, I'm having a real conversation. Like, dude, if that trade's out there, like, how am I not doing this in best ball, right?
I don't know, man. I looked at your dynasty rankings. He's the number 1 wide receiver in your ranks.
There you go, Deebo. Yeah, there he is. We call that foul play.
What? What? There was no foul play involved.
So
you must have had too much Buffalo Trace one night and just
exactly. It just, I'm sure, it just
burying the hatchet with Deebo.
Exactly.
I'd do it.
Is there a team or league situation where I'd be better off with Flowers or a first, someone than Ridley? I mean, in best ball, I'm taking Zay Flowers in a first every single time.
Oh, shit, yeah. Yeah.
Now, Mike, the question is, he's also asking, is there a team where he's better off? I mean, best ball, start anything. I'm taking the first and Zay Flowers. But in lineup, is there because I think the question for me, Simon, is there a format where you're saying, like, no, I don't want the first and Zay Flowers? Like, does that exist?
No.
Lineup start 9. You're saying process, because even though Ridley looks like he could be a absolute unit,
could be.
Zay Flowers did too well in game 1. Plus, you get the first. You have more outs, right?
Yep. You can flip Zay if you actually need production for something in the same thing that's going to be, and you just pocket the first.
Yep.
Yeah,
I think that's where
play for me, regardless.
Mm-hmm.
You look at what Ridley's absolute, what his realistic production could be, and you're going to find, probably 5-6 wide receivers around that range where you go, yeah, they don't cost what Calvin Ridley does, or they don't have the steam that Calvin Ridley does, but they have similar production. So, could I trade Zay Flowers straight up for one of them? Yeah, and then I just take home the first for free. That's the multiple moves. Even in a start 9 lineup league, makes sense to do it that way.
Yeah, I think that would be the format where if you didn't make the trade, I could that would be the only one where I could see where someone's even really arguing on the other side of it, right? Is there? Yeah. And I think the one thing to think about in that format is, for both sides of it, there's a scenario where it's Calvin Ridley if he has this type of a target share and opportunity with Trevor Lawrence in this offense.
Yeah,
sky's the limit. Now, Zay Flowers is coming off of a great volume week, and I think the volume is going to be pretty good. Andrews comes back, eats into that a little bit. Not saying Zay Flowers isn't still a great talent, but to the point, Mike, you're making about Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, this may be a better name than is every single week starting. But you have the first. That's where the trade is not just one player. However, in start 9, a lot of times people want to have the full dollar than they want to have even $1.25, but it's all in quarters, right? So that's where that trade comes around.
The Calvin Ridley thing could really be a Stephon Diggs 2.0 situation, right?
Yes.
Although it's going to last a lot shorter, right? Diggs is only 1 year older than him. It's kind of weird to say, right? It feels like Diggs has been around for forever and really still a young guy, and that's not really the case. But
true,
you could have that situation, though. We could be talking about, I'll be out here defending Calvin Ridley next year, being like, why are we ranking him so low in Dynasty? I get it. Like, it's going to be shorter because of his age factor, but production-wise, could still be there. He could still be at a credible value. But I think even in that case, like, if people are going to shit on him because of the age, then, taking Zay Flowers in the first because of the Zay hype is just more ammunition for you to go, we should just do this and then find somebody else.
Yeah. I think the other thing to talk about, too, is in
like could you trade Zay Flowers? It doesn't feel this way, Adam, but doesn't feel like you could almost trade Zay Flowers right now for DeVonta Adams straight up? Like, you're almost approaching that territory right now. Was that?
I think there's a lot of overreaction to Zay. Not even saying it's all wrong, but I think there's probably – I don't think you can do that often, but I bet you it can happen in certain leagues, yes.
Fucking keep trade cut. You just go look at it. They've already done it.
Right.
They probably did. They did it by Monday night, like it was already done.
I think by 5 o'clock, we're looking at this passing. But the one thing I did want to talk about, because I think all the Dynasty degenerates listen. A lot of us play in best ball, but there's plenty of us that do not. And I think I want to go back to the Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave thing, and really have more of a best ball lens on it, or not as much of a best ball lens on it, right? Because I think some people that they hear tear down and they understand what that process is because we talked about it at length. But when you don't play in a lot of best ball, or that is a little foreign to you, and that's not the way you approach your lineup teams. Again, now we go to the Chris Olave discussion. And it's not in best ball where, hey, dude, you give me a top 20, top 25 receiver, and you give me that first. In best ball, like, I don't even necessarily have to love the player to say, hey, that move makes sense. Because the process is tearing down and getting multiple assets, more shots at the dartboard. However, in a lineup league, if you're going to play the any running back on a 53 approach, like, most people are going to be a lot more selective in the player in this tear down that they're going to get for, said receiver. Right now you're having the exact same thing. I think this is where we can almost transition this to current day. I don't think people have given up on Wilson yet. Whether they should or shouldn't, I can't guarantee that. I'm not necessarily giving up on him, but my hopes for him this year are not as good. But people are starting to feel like they're giving up on this season of Drake London. So, here's another discussion. In lineup, I think, one, how selective are you in a lineup start 9 or start 10 if you were going to try to get wide receiver 3 prices in theory? Because the 2 seconds thing now is not really of interest as much at all in a lineup league versus, getting that in a best ball. So what would that look like? What are the players types that you're willing to go to? And then 2, right now I think the actionable thing is also Drake London. There's a lot of people on panic sell Drake London because I want production. So I guess kind of a 2-part question. Revisiting, but also bringing Drake London into this and talking from the lineup lens.
I think this is what I was hinting to or alluding to earlier. I get it. The format and start 9 doesn't lend you to, you don't want to tear down as far, and you don't want to settle for 2 seconds because they don't mean as much in your league format. I think we as dynasty managers, though, to get that edge and to also de-risk yourself, need to be more open to that kind of thing. We need to be more open to DK Metcalf in 2 seconds for Garrett Wilson because people were hating on DK Metcalf. Like, we like him, but people didn't like him as much. Maybe you go down to Brandon Aiyuk in 2 seconds. Maybe you go down to oh, shit. This is weird. Weird to say. Michael Pittman, 2 seconds. Even in a start 9 or a shallower one. And I know the seconds don't mean as much, but there's liquidity that you still have that you could package later in a deal. And a second, to be completely honest, Adam, while it itself is not going to go buy you more than likely a player that's going to be a difference maker for your team in a start 9, it's a piece that you can add to other deals that people may go, this is getting me a difference maker, a true one. But if you have things that have risky downside, like a Garrett Wilson or like a Chris Olave or like a Drake London before this week, those are the things even in shallower leagues you should be exploring more. Like, those should be the moves that you go, this feels gross, this feels uncomfortable, but I need to do it for almost out of necessity. Like, this is almost an automatic thing. I'm selling something at its peak, and I'm getting multiple pieces in return. I'm not saying go out and take, pre-Puka Nacua breakout, 3 fucking Puka Nacuas for your Garrett Wilson. Don't be ridiculous. We're not insane. But find something in that reasonable range, because the big thing, especially at wide receiver, Adam, what makes it so beneficial is I can look at probably 30 wide receivers and tell you they all have a realistic shot at being a top 5 wide receiver on the year. But nobody ever wants to admit that. Calvin Ridley started from outside this range, way outside this range. Not only last year with the gambling suspension, but heading up, it's been a slow build-up where people are inevitably getting on board with Calvin Ridley, and then you see week 1, and now it looks like top 5 season. Shit, this is realistic opportunity. This is almost guaranteed at this point. That's not how it fucking started, though. Calvin Ridley was in the 30s, 40s for wide receivers.
Sure.
Wide receiver is such a deep position where I think if you can just get over the stomach, where it sounds gross to go down to wide receiver 24 from wide receiver 3 and get your draft picks, even if they're draft picks in that format that don't seem to matter so much, that's the move, that's the edge, and that's what you should be doing going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, okay, so there's 30 receivers. For me, I wouldn't put 30 in the category. I understand your point, though. It's a deep position where there are a lot of players that have the ability to pop off, not just weekly, but for a season. They could be very good players, right? Difference makers. I do think, though, one of the things about the position, like Ridley, I'll use him as an example, where, all right, if you're going to do this type of a thing in a format like that, if I'm going to say I really, really, really need to get off of Garrett Wilson, I think in this format, the reason I'm not going to panic as much about getting off of him is, realistically, there's a scenario where him and, let's say, a Pittman really don't finish that different, and the market for Wilson's better to trade out elsewhere. So, but with Ridley, let's just talk about this for a second. Ridley's attached to Trevor Lawrence. So if I'm going to do this type of a trade, I'm almost looking for what are the type of receivers that are devalued that I'm willing to say have, if things hit right, because in this format, I'm really looking to consolidate and stack up studs that have a chance to be, like your point, top 12, top 5, top 10.
Mm-hmm.
So Ridley, I think, attached to Lawrence, if it all was to hit, you could make the case, without seeing week 1, man, if he ends up getting that, alpha role, that's something I want. Whereas Pittman, as much as I've thought and liked the player, Anthony Richardson, young quarterback coming over, if I'm looking to replace it right now, I'm not even saying you can't make the trade for that. To me, that's where, I'd be, if you're going to do this and you're not going to get a true first, get off of this type of a player, I'd be looking to what receivers are the ones I want. So I think you can be a little more selective. Now, Brandon Aiyuk is a perfect example of one. He's attached to Brock Purdy. Nobody saw, as much as we love him, nobody saw him putting up that week 1, and to the point you're making, that doesn't even look like it's going away for the full season. He might be a top 10, 12 receiver for the year. Nobody's going to look at you crazy anymore. So sometimes the tear down approach can work. I think when you're getting crusty, though, as far as not getting back, reaping top crazy wide receiver 3 pricing for one Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave, I'm looking to chase someone that can be a positional difference maker and take those extra picks. Now, what about Drake London? So, like right now with Drake London, is he one that you're talking about? You'll take the Pittman. Is it any different for him, or are you almost a little more aggressive in what you'll take back for London, given the Arthur Smith thing kind of really is scary for the whole season?
Yeah, I think this one's more of a caution, not downright panic, right? But there's a little bit more alarm. Like, Adam, am I more worried about Drake London's long-term value or Garrett Wilson's? Right now, it's Drake London's, right? Because of this QE situation's even worse than Zach Wilson.
Hard to believe, but yeah,
that.
Right.
The offensive coordinator is even worse than Nathaniel Hackett. Right?
I think that's the big thing for a passing weapon. This is not the offense you want pieces of.
We told ourselves a story that was rosy about the target share, and then didn't really look at total volume or the fact that this could go down. But I think I'm a little bit more concerned. But Adam, I'm not like totally panicked. Like, I'm not desperately trying to get off of Drake London before the bottom falls out, because I also do think there's probably going to be a game coming up where he goes 10 for 100 and a touchdown, and people are like, "I've told you," and that's kind of where you go. All right. Now is my time to get off him. But that's just dynasty market. I think I'm interested in seeing what people will buy him for. If I can get out at a first and a second price, like, I think I just cash out and go, yep, here you go. You take it, and I'll go do something else. Like, I'll go figure out what else I want to do to replace it. But I'm not going like any first. Like, I need to get out so badly, or any wide receiver in the top 40. Like, give me your Puka Nacua. No, thank you. But yeah, I am a little bit more concerned about him. I think it just speaks to the wide receiver position. Like, this stuff can change so much. And for me, Adam, it's really just about the amount of wide receivers we have in this game, right? We're getting more and more, it seems, every year, more and more talented. I want to give a little bit of a shout out to T-Rock. Her article he wrote for the website a couple of weeks ago about positional volatility. And you think about it, this just kind of speaks to the Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave, or if you want to throw Drake London in, and how high he got elevated too, just on projection type production. Adam, wide receivers repeat at the most consistent basis in all of fantasy football as far as elite production, like the most consistent. And Adam, it isn't like new breakouts every single year. That's usually not the thing. What's usually scoring points is the old crusty vets, the old standbys. The same fucking people that were in there last year are going to be the same, more than likely, people that do it the next year. As much as we want to, in a dynasty landscape, go, shit, like, I don't really believe this guy was a, wide receiver 14 on the year last year. Odds are, if he stays healthy, he's probably going to be in that same ballpark the next year. So we always want to put the next one in. Like, we always want to move the next one in. And I'm telling you, like, Garrett Wilson could have broken out. Chris Olave could break out this year. I'm not saying that they wouldn't. But likelihood is it probably wasn't happening. The odds say that, they might approach or jump up a few spots, but they were going to have a hard time cracking that top 12 territory. They're going to have a hard time breaking that value ceiling, like, at this point. And I think the whole overall theme of my this podcast, the whole overall theme of what I was trying to get at, Adam, is anytime you start to approach that, where the dynasty value is more than what the production is by a fair amount, right? I don't know what Garrett Wilson was last year, wide receiver 23, 24. I don't know what the fuck
points per game, like probably depending on format, but in PPR it was roughly 22 to 25.
Right. Not top 5, right? Like, wasn't close.
No, of course not.
And if you have this big of a gap between what you're actually getting from production and what people are perceiving as dynasty value, even if it's not 100% real, Adam, the fact was it was a real for enough people where, a wide receiver like Michael Pittman, who outproduced him last year, is ranked 15 spots lower than him for almost everybody else universally. Mm-hmm. If that's the kind of value discrepancy you're going to have from actual production, those are going to become more automatic sells for me. Less about projection, less about what I think about the player, more about what they've actually done on the field, and more about the overall process of just taking the extra on top of it. Now, it doesn't have to be this old school extra that we always talk about with get a first, because like you said, people are wising up. They're becoming harder. People hold on to them longer. They go, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to do this traditional tear down. you can still work some angles and you can still get some of these done, but it may not be the case. I'm really just talking about getting more comfortable, just taking less, right? Taking 80% of what we thought we used to be able to get. And I think overall, if you do that and stop putting so much value into, projections, I think we'll be better off as a dynasty community, right? The people who follow this, the dynasty degenerates, will win more in the end. And the positional volatility that T-Rock was talking about, if you guys want to go take a look at it, pretty much signifies that. I think the only positions you can really look at it for positional volatility and go per projections, like breakouts, that kind of stuff, would be the running back position, because the new hot rookie, the new guy who breaks on the scene all the time, those guys can actually crack top 5 and give you elite production based on nothing.
All right, there you have it. I don't necessarily agree. I agree with a lot of the points you made. I don't agree with all of it, but yeah, I mean, I think, listen, overall, if you're able to tear down at a lot of positions and get to a player that you feel comfortable with, and you're netting the extra, and like to Mike's point, like if you go out there and you try to always get the trade value that Keep Trade Cut or some of these calculators say, you're probably not going to get that much as the extra. So definitely agree with that point. I think one of the things about the article that I read that really stands out to me on the flip side of that is, how many receivers do we say in their rookie season are top 12 receivers in their year one? And you're going to find it's very, very few, right? And we know that. So I'm not really going to say I'm selling my rookie receiver that shows a lot of promise because he didn't just produce in year one. Now, where it starts getting different is year 2, we're saying the same thing, right? You get like the Drake London thing. If Garrett Wilson doesn't produce, now all of a sudden the values will change and players' projections will be different. But part of the problem with, the rookie season that's so great and alluring, where you would like to sell at a peak if you can, right? Because even if you could sell at a perfect peak, to your point, you net out unless he just smashes. And even then, you're probably still getting 90% or 80% of what you would have captured if he gets all the way there. The thing is, because of what you said and what T-Rock wrote, top 12 receivers, they tend to stay. You get one of these guys that gets top 12 in their 23, 24-year-old season, Mike, that is an asset that you don't want to ever let go. So to the point, though, if you're going to make a bet, more often than not, they're not going to actually finish in the top 12 because there's only 12. So, but that's where like selling off of one of those light could be problematic. Now, for everyone listening, Dynasty Degenerates, I think there's a lot of really good information here. Ultimately, how you take it, what you apply, what you don't, that should be up to you, and how you kind of see it fit for your different teams. Think about your formats, all that. I thought really good discussion today, man, between the wide receivers, some of the guys that popped off that you didn't expect, tearing down, understanding your different formats, best ball and lineup, start 9, 10, start 12, best ball is going to change a lot of what you take on and how really uncomfortable, to Mike's point, you're willing to go in the plus department. So think about that for your teams, and think about, for me, one last point is, which one of these guys that's either really dipped in value off of a week or a couple weeks are you looking at buying low? And are there some that you want to say, man, I love this player, but he's had a great start to the year. Am I better liquidating now, again, in the tear down sense? So think about all those things.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway too, is just the overall strategy, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're worried or panicking right now and you're selling low, like that's what people capitalize on, right?
Right.
Like, it's like the stock market. And I know people will be like, well, you know, if you got out at this time, then you wouldn't have lost this much money. I get it. There's stocks that'll go to zero. Trey Lance, whatever. I get it. It happens, right? But generally, Adam, now is the worst time to sell. Like, wait for that little bounce back and then sell. Wait for that little bit of bubble and then sell. And the kind of the same thing. If a stock is on this fucking trajectory, just going straight up, at what point do you go, like, I just got to get out? Like, I'm good. Like, I love them to death, but come on. Like, how much higher can I actually go? And I think if you ask yourself that question overall, and you kind of stay with that in the dynasty trade landscape, you'll be completely fine.
Yeah, in a process if you're making those trades. I think, what we should do is call this title the Puka Nakua Dogecoin, because that is what we're looking at right now, Dynasty Degenerates.
Shit, this more like Shiba coin.
Yeah, find your type of coin, your crypto that you think this is going to the moon, and did you hold or not? And just remember, when your league mates are playing chess, play 4D chess.
That's gonna do it. I'm gonna take my ass to bed. Love y'all. Peace.
Peace.